Okay, I think we're live here, but I'm not sure if the audio is working. Can anybody let me know if you can hear me by raising your hand or I'm kind of new to Zoom. Let's see here. Okay, you can hear me. Great. So I can't hear myself going through the feedback, but as long as at least one of you can hear me, I think we're in business. Now, the next big question is, can you see me? Francis, perhaps you could let me know since you just replied to the. Okay, good. Sorry, I'm not that tech savvy, everybody. My name is Christopher Tompkins. I'm very happy to be with all of you. And this is a Q&A session for my Patreon page or campaign, I guess you would call it. This particularly is a campaign to help support my PhD writing on the Tantric origins of Kundalini. And so for some of you that are current donors, this is our first time that we're doing this Q&A session, and I think I've invited a few guests as well. So check out the whole page, which is www.patreon.com/Kundalini yoga. Okay. So as requested, I asked for a bunch of questions on my research, and I got a lot of responses back. So what I did was I tried to fine tune these questions into a couple of core questions that are kind of a composite, if you will, of what I've been getting. So, it's been an interesting experience. Today alone, I just wrote for something like 8 hours, and a lot of that was editing. And the piece of the PhD that I'm on right now is actually how Kundalini was put into practice in daily pranayama or breath based yoga, the yoga of the tantras. And so I hope to close this session with a little passage. Hopefully it's not too heady on from this section that I wrote today, which actually gives an overview of how this power, this Kundalini power, is applied, and also what it is. Right? There's a little bit of that in the passage that I'll read. And this is sort of the key question that I'd like to just start with tonight. And before I begin, I'd like to get my questions here. I'd like to just make this disclaimer that we're taking real baby steps here in unpacking, or even, if you will, unlearning some of what we've taught about this coiled power and the application of it to daily yoga practice, as it's been taught to us through many of the secondary books on it, meaning books written by people, not academics. Also, it's very important to note that all of our knowledge of Kundalini, and here I am getting into my first question, what are my sources and where does all of this come from? Most of our knowledge, if but all of it, in terms of what we received academically on Kundalini, comes from two particular pieces of literature, from what I can tell. The first is the translation of a chapter. I'm going to say this slowly. The translation of a chapter from a 16th century tantric work by a guy named Purnananda. Great name, right? It means guy who's full of bliss. Purnananda, his chapter called the Shat Chakra Nirupana, which is the explanation of the 6 chakras in English. And this chapter from his Tattva Chintamani, the jewel of awakened consciousness, or the essence of reality. This chapter, the 6th chapter from his Tattva Chintamani, was translated by a fellow named Arthur Avalon, aka John Woodruff. Now, this translation was featured in a book called The Serpent Power, which informs a lot of our information, if not all of our information at this point, on the chakra system as we've inherited it. Not the original text. I'm very careful here to say the translation and interpretation by this fellow Arthur Avalon is what informs us. And this is really where Kundalini is first introduced to us, that's to say, in the modern West. And this book, Serpent Power, was published, I believe, in 1918. So that's source number one. Source number two is a very interesting source and probably was of great influence on Avalon's interpretation of the work of Purnananda, and that is the so-called Hatha Yoga Pradipika, or as it was originally known, the Hatha Pradipika, light on, and I'm going to say this the way it actually was meant originally, light Pradipika on, or insight on the application of the syllable ka, ka. Notice my tongue is striking the roof of my mouth, ka, with the letter ha, right? So ha is the out breath. And there's a suggestion in the way I'm rendering this, probably in a way you have not heard that book title translated, but there's a suggestion here in the way I'm rendering this that all is not what it seems. That is to say, Hatha doesn't necessarily mean force, though it can, nor is ha and ka necessarily or at all words or syllables that mean respectively sun and moon. Rather, the syllable ka is launched through the palate center to reach the crown chakra in the original tantras, through or by means of the syllable ha. Ha is nothing other than ka, the out breath. So this is suggesting a work of or practice of yoga in this work. It's suggested by this term hatha, insofar as that what we're engaging here is this syllable ha, a particular sound that is made in the body that, when organized and orchestrated through a series of yoga practices, has the ability to break through the so-called granthis, or blocks that retain karmic blockages, karmic impurity, you might say, as the texts say. They call karmic blockages impurities. Not that our body's impure, but that through not healing past traumas and not practicing yoga for many lifetimes, etc., we have storage of this so-called karmic blockages or impurity, which is really just something that we've been purified with our awareness or with the sound current of this practice. So this Hatha Pradipika, then, light on how to move the syllable ka, has been lost to us insofar as its original context with Kundalini Yoga. Instead, we have a text rendered to us in modern translation that essentially defines Kundalini in a way that is absolutely non-existent in all of the other tantric sources. And I want to be very clear in making this point. The Hatha Pradipika, which, by the way, is, I believe, the only tantra-related text that is prescribed by the Yoga Alliance as part of certification programs. It's a little aside there. The Hatha Pradipika is the only text that is a central text that gives us this practice, or at least the overview of a practice called Kundalini Yoga, in which the word Kundalini and the concept of Kundalini is defined in a very specific way that does not match what is in the source tantras. Now, the Hatha Pradipika, I have a passage of it right here, the defining passage, specifically says, Sarvavesham Yoga Tantranam Tatadharo Kundalini. Kundalini is the foundation of the yoga, of the Hatha yoga practiced in all of the tantras, right? And this is a phrase or a claim that's made throughout the tantras as well. So far, so good. This text, Hatha Pradipika, which has come down to us obviously in English, is replicating a very standard statement that somehow this thing called Kundalini is the foundation of Hatha yoga. Okay, but then it goes on to say, I have a commentary here as well that was made in the 19th century on the Hatha Pradipika by Brahmananda. Then it goes on to say, essentially, the goal of this yoga is to awaken Prabodhayitum Ishwarim, the goddess, who is known as Kundalini. Where is this goddess? She is Suptam Mudra Bhyasyam Samachari. She is sleeping, asleep, Brahmadwara Mukhe, with her mouth covering something called the doorway to Brahman, right? And the text goes on to locate that doorway of Brahman as the opening to the central channel, meaning to say this Kundalini thing, this goddess who is described thereafter as a coiled serpent, is asleep with her mouth covering the doorway to liberation. That's it. And this is replicated in other so-called Hatha texts. Now, this passage and in fact, everything on Kundalini, supposedly that is also in all of the tantras, quote unquote, gives us an image of a coiled serpent, which has no other real defining features. Yes, it's called an energy, but energy of what, right? The coiled power of what? Well, it's a coiled serpent goddess, okay? But there's no serpent goddesses in the tantras. Let me say that again. There's no serpent goddesses in the tantras. And this is supposed to be the yoga that comes from all of the tantras. So already there's a bit of a dubious teaching here, because emphatically we see throughout this particular text, again, one of the two through which all of our understanding of Kundalini has come down, at least through texts, not through personal experience, but at least through texts. This coiled serpent asleep at the base of the spine is also significantly not an active power at any time, meaning it's never proactively used to achieve anything in the body. Rather, it is described as a blockage. The sleeping coiled snake which has somehow got down into the body, is coiled up, and it's blocking the central channel. And the goal of the yogi is to perform these techniques called Hatha techniques, Hattopayas. That's to say, 3-part pranayama, meditations, mudras, bandhas, etc. All of these practices are meant to awaken, or rather, literally at one point we're told, grasp the snake and somehow hurl it out of the body. That way it is no longer a blockage to liberation. Now, if you haven't heard this rendition, and anything you hear in this broadcast or recording, as fate may be, all of this is coming out in my PhD work. So everything will be answered with tremendous citations. This is an update. So the question is, if this isn't what Kundalini is, or if this is suspect, that's to say, well, if this is a power that we don't even have translated or identified as any particular form of energy, but something that is simply a blockage at the base of the spine, is it possible that all of the tantras that the Hatha Pradipika speaks of, hundreds of which we now have access to, is it possible that they give a different story, right, of what this Kundalini is and why it is the foundation of all of yoga? Okay, so what I'd like to do is, in this kind of brief introductory Q&A session, having received so many questions here, is in just a moment give you sort of hot off the press some of the core definitions of Kundalini that are given in the many tantric sources that are now available to us, and in this case, me. But let me just pause for a minute to thoroughly answer this question. Where are my sources from? Well, since the time of Arthur Avalon, who wrote The Serpent Power, again, this text mainly gives us the physiology of the subtle body, and kind of, I meant to say this as well, kind of relies on the Hatha Pradipika, insofar as Avalon seems to wholesale adopt this notion of a coiled serpent at the base of the spine, even though the source text that he's translating, as it turns out, and as I think we'll see tonight, does not describe Kundalini this way. Let me repeat. Kundalini, as defined by the original tantric authors who wrote the two texts that inform the serpent power, the Tattva Chintamani by Purnananda and the Shakti Tarangani by his guru. These two texts that inform essentially Avalon's translation of one chapter from one of those texts. These two authors have a totally different translation, a totally different interpretation of what Kundalini is as an active power that is engaged in the body. So Avalon did not get to those chapters essentially that give this true definition of Kundalini. So he rendered a Hatha Pradipika based understanding of what Kundalini is, meaning to say dormant at the base of the spine. Now, I mentioned then Purnananda and his guru, Brahmananda, and these two masters belong to the so-called Tripura or Sri Vidya lineage of Tantric Shaivism. But there are 9 lineages altogether, dating back to the middle of the 5th century CE. And the Tantric movement per se gradually winds down and burns out, or is wiped out, you might say, one way of putting it, by the mid or late 19th century. The last text that I have, which is a manual on yogic practice, the Shakta Pramoda, was authored in 1889. And this is also, incidentally, the last text that gives us the correct chakra seed mantras that are ubiquitously given in all tantric sources. So we have a 1400-year tradition that consistently defines Kundalini as the foundation of its yoga. And the tantras and their commentaries and the manuals on the yogic rituals that inform these tantric texts, all of this has not really been made available to us until the last couple of decades through the arduous work of scholars who have scanned manuscripts and typed them in to a searchable format so that we can search through, literally through sophisticated search systems that could pick up the language in terms of e-text. So I basically have hundreds of e-texts of tantras and tantric related sources that I'm drawing from. And what we're looking for in this research is a consensus, a practice that is replicated regardless of lineage in all the tantras, a practice that eventually is called in the Tattva Chintamani Kundalini Yoga. That phrase itself, not to be confused with the system of practice, the modern system of practice that you may have heard of. This is not the same system, but rather Kundalini Yoga means literally yoga, how to apply, how to engage Kundalini. When the word yoga follows any other noun, it is a suffix that means application of the word that comes before. Yoga, the word yoga, when it follows any other noun, means the application or engagement of the word that comes before. So what is the Kundalini Yoga? The application of this Kundalini. Well, first of all, we define what Kundalini is. And I'm going to give you a smattering for this session of definitions from a number of sources, which I haven't even looked at this document in a while. I have in front of me, as you can perhaps see, about 5 pages from a 90-page document that I've made that draws definitions of Kundalini from the Tantras. Some of them are laudatory, meaning they're praising this coiled power that granted the author or the poet liberation. Others are technical, but I think you'll be intrigued by what some of these passages have to reveal to us. Okay, so let's start with, let's start with the Shaktananda Tarangini. This is the beautiful work that was composed by Brahmananda, guru of the author of Avalon's work and the Serpent Power, the Tattva Chintamani. And he says, Kundalini Shushti Rupam, Kundalini Akya Shakti Stitaha. Kundalini is the power of creation, or appears in the moment that creation begins, whatever that means. And then Kundalini Akya. I love this term Akya because it means name or term. The term Kundalini, he defines as Shakti or Shaktis, Stita. Stita, very, very critical term. You will see the word Stita, S-T-H-I-T-A with a dash over it, with the word or the term Kundalini all over the place, including the Hatha Pradipika. This is the word that has been mistakenly translated as stationary or dormant. Kundalini is Stita. Stita is actually a past participle that means held still. Held still. Kundalini, Brahmananda defines as Shakti, that is Stita, held still. So that connotes Shakti, energy, normally doing what energy does, which is moves. Energy isn't energy unless it's moving. And this is one of the great conundrums of the illogicity, the non-logic of saying that Kundalini or Shakti at all could ever be dormant. But it can be held still in a vibration that is poised to act. It can be held still in a vibration that's poised to act. So this term stitaha then, should I let the whole secret out at once? Essentially, when you kind of zoom out and look at the original tantric passages that give us the so-called vinyasa or sequence of how and when and where this Kundalini was applied in seated breath practice, and even eventually in moving postural yoga poses as well. More on that in a future session. We zoom out and we see that something that is held still in the middle of a practice obviously is a very poignant moment, okay? Very poignant moment. So how is it held still? Well, first, what is it, right? How can we even understand what's held still and why it's held still until we get some sense of what it is, right? Not given to us in the Tantric text. What is it that is coiled and held still? And let's pause there. This is where the unlearning comes in a bit. Because if you're like me, you were conditioned early on through studying the texts that are out there or listening to teachers that are paraphrasing the texts. And by texts, I mean secondary literature written by modern authors based on the Hatha Pradipika or based on Avalon's serpent power. There might be a kind of unconscious resistance to what we're hearing. But I want to reiterate that I'm not the one that is claiming anything. I'm simply reading to you, as somebody who can read Sanskrit and has been reading these texts for 10 years, what these texts are saying. And they're not saying what we've been taught. So it's not about Tompkins here, just to make that point. Where was I? So, right. So when we hear the term Kundalini, we might immediately think and just kind of wave off, oh, serpent power, coiled up, dormant force, awaken my Kundalini. Well, to awaken Kundalini doesn't quite make sense because Kundalini is literally an adjective, coiled. The correct question would be, before we even ask how awakening or what awakening has to do with it, is what is coiled? What is the energy that is coiled, right? And something that's coiled up, like, for example, as we've heard, like a sleeping serpent, this is but one analogy that's given in these texts for the shape of what is coiled. So there's analogies such as the shape of a serpent that is bhujanga kutala kritihi, winding up or down into the state or into the position of sleeping. Actually doesn't mean a sleeping serpent or dormant serpent. It means Kundalini associated with the serpent going to sleep is the shape of a snake that's curling up or uncurling from sleep. So we have this image of a spiral, right? And this is going to tap into, the visuals that I've been given. I think I posted a visual of the golden mean, the spiral of the universe. So 3.5-part spiral that's envisioned is exactly what we're talking about here. Not something dormant, but something sthita, poised and ready to spring or be sprung, right? So, getting back to the Shakti Tarangini, Shaktananda Tarangini is the full version, full name of that text. Nada Rupa Kundalini. Kundalini is the first appearance of resonance. Kundalini is the first appearance of resonance. Let's put a little pause on that. Come back to that. Kundalini, or rather, Shakti, when coiled, indicates the initial appearance of resonance or sound, but very subtle. So what is this a resonance of? Come back to that. The Varahi Tantra says, Maha Kundalini Devi Maha Raveti. This is another definition of Kundalini. The great coiled power is defined as the goddess poised to manifest into a great roar. Kundalini, coiled up, is the goddess coiled up, poised to transform into a great sonic roar, right? All roars are sonic, but this is a subtle science of sound. Okay? Kundalini, Kala Kampita, Rudra Yamala Tantra. Kundalini is that moment, that very, very subtle moment in the breath when Kundalini or Shakti quivers into a coil or undulates or vibrates into a coil, right? And then finally, what is the moment? We talked about Kundalini is shakti held still. Okay, well, what is held still? What process is held still for this apparently some kind of sonic vibration to manifest into a great roar? Let's see, this is, glasses would help. Excuse me, everybody. I'm still getting used to them here at 45 years old. Rudra Yamala Tantra. Prana Panchaka Rupena. Very important verse. Sporatiti artaha. Santaha Kundalini. Spanda Sparsha. Samvit Kalamala. Okay. When Shakti becomes coiled, Kundalini, this is the shape of pure consciousness that begins to pulsate or vibrate, spanda sparsha. Right? With what? It is spurati. She is defined as vibrational vortex or vibrational shape, spurati, that is formed through prana panchaka rupena, through the withdrawal or the manifestation of the 5 pranas drawn into one point, the passage goes on to say. Okay, when the 5 prana vayus, which we'll define in a moment, come to a point, this point or this axis mundi, you might say, in the body begins to vibrate and form a coil of power that is made of resonance, and this resonance is meant to be germinated, you might say. When we think of Kundalini in the Tantra is referred to as a sprout of sound, germinate or emanate or transform into a great roar in the subtle body. But first, what are the 5 vayus? Some of you know this. This is a reference to the prana vayus, the pranic winds, first and foremost, the descending in-breath called apana vayu, the lunar breath, sometimes also called the moon for its coolness and other metaphors. When we draw in the moon into the heart, we're drawing the in-breath down and creating this expansiveness in the belly and the chest. And when we release the apana vayu, or rather release the wind, it is transformed into prana vayu with a little p. And this means that which reverses, that which moves against. So this is the exhalation. Panavayu down, moon, and the sun, or pranavayu, as the warm breath rising up. That's 2 of them. Beyond this, we have Vyanavayu, circulatory energy, the energy of the nervous system, etc. We have Udanavayu, which is the energy of speech, and then finally Samanavayu. Now this is very important. Samanavayu is the energy in everyday life of digestion, but it's that which equalizes or draws prana to the center. So Samanavayu here is one of the 5 vayus, and what we're given to understand then is that there is not only a pause in breath, because all 5 breaths or energies of these 5 currents are somehow coming to a coiled point, but they are also vibrated with sound. There's a sound essence in this, a sound current. Now, what is this sound current? So the fact that there is a withdrawal of these 5 energy fields into one point suggests what some of you, as I can see on the responses here, somebody said very correctly, kumbhaka. This is the practice of kumbhaka, meaning to say in the standard 3-part pranayama that this Kundalini is engaged in, which has come down to us without the application of Kundalini, by the way, we find that Kundalini is in fact the result or the effect, the shape, this coiled shape is the resonance coil effect of the moment in which the in-breath or the moon has been drawn down to the navel plexus and the out-breath or sun is retained in that location. And that retention creates this internal subtle flame on a wick, as it's described, the weapon of pure vibration, the sound or seed sound of the universe that begins to pull in, while we're in breath pause, all of the 5 vital currents coiling up as if to spring something straight up the central channel. That coiling up of the 5 winds coming to center is called, as we just heard, spuranti, the quivering Kundalini, coiled shape. That one is to visualize all, and this is key, all during the practice of Kumbhaka. Now, in the Hatha text from which we've gotten this idea of a dormant thing that is to be awoken, Kundalini is a sleeping serpent at the base of the spine, doesn't fit with this at all. Why? Because Kundalini is the effect here in the Tantras of pranayama. We're trying to produce a coil of resonance. What that resonance is, I haven't gotten to yet, but we're trying to produce this. In the Hatha text, we are doing pranayama and mudras to go down below, let me repeat, down below the range of breath, right, which is from the palate to the navel, down to the base of the spine to extract some snake thing that's coiled up. Totally different rendering of what is in the Tantras, okay? So, a little bit more here. Tatra Kundalini Shaktir Maya Karmanusarani. Shakti, when coiled, contains the moving power of creation, measured forth as Maya, where Maya, here the feminine word, simply means that which measures forth, that which gives forth. So when Shakti is held still, we're taught that this is the power of creativity as well as a yogic energy that we invoke through this practice. It's also the power of creativity that contains within it the activating Shakti that gives rise to this whole subtle body microcosm. So Kundalini is first taught, and this is a slight digression on purpose, Kundalini is first taught to be the coiled power of pure omniscient Shiva Shakti, pure consciousness that coils up, ready to spring down as the first inhalation, literally the first breath the baby takes coming out of the womb, so to speak, right? And when this breath is taken, Kundalini then springs down a current of breath that will then recycle or spring itself 21,600 times a day throughout the rest of our lives. Now, so this Kundalini here is taught or introduced in these tantras simply as that coiling spring, the coiling up of sonic energy of the syllable Om that springs forth all of life in the universe, but in the subtle body in terms of the human microcosm, downward as the cycle of breaths. What happens then if, in order to eliminate or break up all the karmic blockages that we ourselves have accrued through unhealthy living or through past trauma, as I said, from other lifetimes, that which is stuck at the base of each of these lotus centers in the central channel? What if this coiled power that has the energy to produce life also has the ability to enter the central channel, normally off limits to an ordinary embodied human being? What if it's able to be regenerated from the point of the third eye at the base of the navel, rising through the heart in order to become a nada suchi, a sound needle that pierces these granthis? So this practice, I'm full of preludes, essentially, as I'm unpacking it even today, is one in which, and this is the kind of exciting moment for me to be able to even give you a hint of this as I write it out in an academic fashion. This coiled power then is nothing other than the reflection of the creative power that first gave life to you in this body, that is reformed in these yogic moments of choreographed breath, pause, internal japa or reciting a seed mantra that we're going to spring with this Kundalini power up the central channel, one of the 5 so-called chakra bija mantras. And this practice choreographed with such practices as japa and visualization of the chakra or the element that's associated with that seed mantra. All of these supposedly have the ability, all these practices have the ability to in combination, create enough of a sonic coil to open up this central channel. And this is testified in countless tantric sources, in limitless manuals that have now come down to us. And I want to give you a sense of that in the writing that I wrote today, which is a summary of that moment of generating this power. But first, give you a couple more definitions to just sit with and germinate with and meditate on. Bhukti Mukti Pala Prada, the Jnana Ratnavali tells us. Jnana Ratnavali means the vine that brings forth or exposes the jewels of wisdom. Great text, 13th century South Indian. And its author, Jnana Shiva, says, Bhukti Mukti Pala Prada. So Kundalini is the offering we make to ourselves, which grants the reward of mukti, liberation, and bhukti, delight in this human body. What does he mean by that? When this coil of energy, of sonic energy, is effectively produced, it not only creates a clear path through the Sushumna to liberation, literally breaks up all the past karmas that have become stuck in this body, but it also leads to bhukti, which means or connotes what would later be known as jivan mukti, the state of embodied liberation. Because the notion is that the two movements of this coiled power in yogic practice are such that when we break through these granthis and pierce through the crown of the head into the crown lotus, there we find a reservoir of amrita, deathless nectar, the sonic nectar that is said to bestow a deathless state upon the body when then subsequently inhaled or drawn down right through the Sushumna Nadi, so that you become the divine expression of Shiva. You become Parameshwara. And the affirmation is Aham Devo in some texts. I am God. Nachanyosmi, and nothing else. Brahmaivaham Nashokabak. I'm not a receptacle for sorrow. I am the absolute alone, as this amrita comes down, right? Sachidananda Rupoham Nityamukta Swabhavavan. I am being, consciousness, and bliss only, and my truest nature is forever free. So Kundalini then is used in two movements, one that produces liberation, the other that produces bhukti, the joy of experiencing yourself with limitless awareness, free of all suffering while still alive in this body. That is a claim that cannot be made by any other tradition and has not been made by any other tradition prior to the Tantras. So with that, let's see. Oh yeah, and here's the key. So this is from the Tattva Chintamani. This is the same text, once again, that Arthur Avalon was drawing from, although not from this chapter, which defines Kundalini in a way that's very different from a dormant snake at the base of the spine. Om Ishwari, Jagadhatri, Lalita, Sundari, Pala, Kundalini, Kula Rupa, Tu Patu Mam Kula Chandika. Beautiful. Kundalini is the supreme power, Parashakti, the beautiful one, Sundari, and in his tradition, Lalita, the goddess Lalita embodied as energy. She is Jagat Dhatri, she who manifests or maintains the whole universe, because she springs forth the breath. So this is also, a reference to our own micro-universe of the subtle body. Tu Patu Mam Kula Chandika. So the ferocity of all of her Kula Devis, she embodies the ferocity of several other goddesses that descend, he says, into me. What are the ferocity of these other goddesses? Well, these goddesses are inflections or mantras, mantric inflections of the syllable Om. The syllable Om is comprised of all the vowels in the Sanskrit alphabet, the power syllable that is unstruck, just as vowels, when pronounced by the human body, contain no striking of the teeth or the lips or any of the tongue striking anything in the mouth. Rather, they are pure sonic current, so that all the vowels together represent the sound that doesn't die and has never been born. This is the syllable Om. And because it's made of vowels, you might guess that the inflections, the Kula Devis as they're called, literally the goddesses that are parts of Kundalini, will be made up of some of the long or deepest resonating vowels in Sanskrit, a, I, U, I, and O. And these particular vowels will form the chakra seed mantras. And those, the correct spelling of those mantras with those vowels has been lost to us. So what he's suggesting here, or what he's teaching us here, specifically Purnananda, is that Kundalini is Om Ishwari, the goddess who personifies the syllable Om, and her Devis that are acted out in the body, that are drawn down somehow into the body and then put to work in the yoga practice, are the inflections, the vowels, the strong vowels within the syllable Om. Now, this is very, very critical, y'all, in terms of the actual science of the yoga that forms the heritage of all modern yoga practices. We've lost this base Kundalini practice because of this distortion of Kundalini being a non-active, dormant power at the base of the spine. So with that, I'd like to read you what I wrote today as a summary of this. And before I do that, I want to just say that in this process of unlearning that I've had to go through, that I invite you that you entertain as well, of just kind of putting aside what we've been taught and really listening to the voice of what these tantras say, it's still going to take baby steps. So if you get like 10% of what I'm saying, I think you're on fire, because I'm just giving you a sort of research and writing update, right, of what I am revealing. So this is what I wrote today, and this is an overview of the sequence of practices that inform this Kundalini yoga as I'm reporting in my PhD. And this answers really the question that kept coming all day long and yesterday as well: how is Kundalini engaged in practice? So I'm going to give you a sense of this, and also in so doing, as we come to a close in this session, to give you a sense of why Kundalini is called the power or the goddess of Om, right? What does Om have to do with Kundalini? Okay. So this is what I wrote. It's going to be slightly academic, but, you know, you can do it. Okay. All phases of this purifying ritual, I wrote, are engaged through a particular 3-part pranayama sequence, or vidhi in Sanskrit, innovated by the Tantrics, in which the coiled power, Kundalini Shakti, is applied in 2 different movements, 2 trajectories, specifically down and then up the vertical axis of the Sushumna. The first part of the practice, 3-part pranayama, called puraka, filling, literally with in-breath, is comprised of an elongated in-breath. The second and most crucial part is an extended retention of the out-breath, known as kumbhaka. The third part is called rechaka, releasing, and comprises a long exhalation through which a protracted sound of one of the seed mantras, the chakra seed mantras, is drawn from the navel up through the central channel. Now, bumping down to where Kundalini comes into this here. In the first sequence, and I'm going to sort of plug in terminology more familiar to you, so when I pause, I'm replacing words a little bit. The chakra seed mantras, powered by the weapon mantra, Hum, are used to destroy any block karmas accrued through daily living, which are found along the central channel at the chakra locations, the lotuses, along the vertical axis. 5 lotuses in particular, and here I'm referring to Muladhara to Vishuddha. 5 lotuses respectively appear at these various locations, each representing one of the 5 elements. The impurity to be removed, karmic impurity, appears at the base of each lotus. Now this is, of course, as I said earlier, and perhaps good to repeat for those that have just joined us, this is referring to karmic blockages that are really about the emotional and mental, psychological traumas of our past that have not been healed, that have literally, according to the Tantras, become stored up as almost like, in fact, literally called dravya, gunk, or substance, a subtle substance that blocks the central channel and blocks your pathway to your own divine realization, namely specifically to say it blocks access to the central channel and therefore or throughout the central channel, and therefore blocks access to the crown lotus, the Sahasrara chakra, 1,000-petaled lotus. This is the lotus that we're trying to access, where, according to countless testimonies, we find this store of amrita, immortal nectar, that's drawn down through the body. When this nectar is drawn down through the body, the power to heal and totally replenish and awaken who we really are as divine beings inside of this beautiful body temple comes into fruition. So, moving on. First, the full potency of Shiva's primal shakti, I wrote, his Adya Shakti, is visualized at the third eye center, coiled up in the shape of a coil, emerging from a seed point, namely the seed point or the dot in the syllable Om. Very critical. This power is slowly drawn down into the navel through the lunar in-breath, equated with the syllable Sa. Next, the vital breaths, and we've heard this in our passage earlier, the various pranavayus of the subtle body are withdrawn into the space of the heart and navel through the during the retention of the solar out-breath, meaning you're holding kumbhaka now. This is the second part of the pranayama practice called kumbhaka. While the yogin's breath remains retained here in the navel, he next performs the visual meditation or fixation and inward recitation of a given chakra seed mantra while visualizing the attributes of its element, of the chakra that that particular mantra correlates with. So if we're working with the seed syllable for, let us say, Swadhisthana chakra, we're working with the visual of Swadhisthana, not where it is located in the initial parts of the practice at the genital region, but now each chakra is visualized in the heart as we're in kumbhaka, reciting the mantra associated with it. In this case, that is the mantra Ving, Ving, V, long I, M with a dot over it. So reciting that mantra, or whichever mantra you're on in the sequence of 5 to be raised through the central channel, you stoke this Kundalini fire. So let's see how that happens. The first goal of these synchronized practices, I write, is to generate the third eye bindu, that seed point I just mentioned, not up here only, but now in the navel. How do you do this? It is formed out of the fusion of the two lateral breaths, the sun and the moon. So the bindu is also described as the seed point that fuses together the syllable sa associated with in-breath and the syllable ha associated with out-breath to form the word or the term hamsa. Now this is a word I write used to signify the successful fusion of the breaths in the navel, which I mentioned earlier and quoted from one tantra about, where all the pranavayus now are gathering. This force is forged into the central channel during kumbhaka, into a seed point that culminates with the sun and moon breaths, literally as if the two orbs. It said that, this is actually like a lunar eclipse. The moon, the in-breath, which has come down, has eclipsed or is holding back the sun. And this creates this fire, as I say. The navel bindu, forged from the heat generated from the fusion of the sun and moon, contain the latent destructive force of Shiva's pervasive power, now condensed into a seed point. The pervasive power of the syllable Om, or the seed point of Om, is now drawn down or forged through the drawing down of the in-breath, fused with the sun or the out-breath. So while inwardly reciting a prescribed bija mantra with the breath still retained, the yogin is to draw the sonic force or the resonance out of the bindu in the navel in the form of a subtle coil, Kundalini, of undulating flame, visualized as extending from the navel into the center of the heart. The specific bindu or seed point from which this flame arises is now the seed point that sits atop the syllable hum. I don't want to get too much into that, but it's basically the weapon mantra of Tantric Shaivism, and the syllable hum then, very similar to Om, is visualized in the navel, but out of the seed point of that syllable now is this coiling flame. You're still in breath pause that is being drawn up slowly while your breath is retained so that it is visualized in the heart. And the understanding here is that visualization of this created coiled energy of the sonic resonance of the seed point, either of Hum or Om, doesn't matter. This seed point is called the honeybee sound, the sound hum. The vibrational nada or resonance of this coil of Kundalini is described as the subtle sound of the seed point in Om, which sounds like a honeybee. So it is that power that we're going to release up through the central channel. This is done through, as I go on to say, a series of breath expulsions, which later becomes, I believe, Kapalabhati. So if you've practiced Kapalabhati, this practice, originally this was accompanied with an expulsion of mantras, of mantric energy, of resonance, that was really the release of Kundalini up the central channel. Powerful enough that it was called a Nadasuchi Kundalini, a sound needle that strings together the lotuses of the central channel, meaning the chakras, in an upward trajectory, so that all that gunk and the karma that's accrued through daily living, through unhealed past trauma, is then pierced and drawn like a sound needle, making a garland of blossoms all the way up into the crown lotus. This is, of course, the seventh chakra. Once these lotuses, these chakras are all drawn here, think of lotuses like sprung or drawn through and fused together in an ascending expulsion of breaths. Once held in the crown lotus, there they are purified of all the karma through being immersed in the amrita, the nectar of pure omniscient awareness. Then Kundalini, this beautiful coil power, is regenerated at the third eye, where the chakras are placed back in their specific locations all along the central channel, from Vishuddha, drawing out of Agya, but down to Vishuddha in the throat, Anahata in the heart, Manipura in the navel, Swadhisthana in the genital region, and finally Muladhara, and she threads them back down again. And then what happens to Kundalini? Well, Kundalini isn't even actually the power that's drawing these chakras up and down. Kundalini is simply the coil of shakti, of condensed pranic energy that rises or descends as Shakti then unfurling herself as the pure power of Shiva. What does this mean in terms of our daily practice? Well, think about, if you might humor me for a moment, think about what it's like for those of you that perhaps have kids or remember when you learned to ride a bike, teaching a child how to ride a bike. Basically, what I just gave you was a kind of philosophized passage that, or say passage that's, laden with technical terms, that refers to a procedure of breath-based, mantra-based practices meant to evoke a subtle sonic power that is supposedly latent in all human bodies, not just in the bodies of tantrics who were teaching and learning this stuff in the ancient Indian period, but rather in all human bodies. This sonic power is a latent force that has the ability, as a creative power of your own body, to also be utilized as a tool of liberation. And just like we learned to ride a bike, to describe riding the bike and all that you have to do, well, you have to pedal this foot forward, and then you have to do the brakes and the balance of the handlebars. And of course, there's the little horn, and then, this wheel does that and the chain does this. I mean, it's very complex, but a 5-year-old learns how to do it. In the same sense, you would be instructed in this basic daily yoga, Kundalini yoga sadhana, in the way that we would instruct a child. Of course, it's a little more advanced than riding a bike, but it's still a procedure of steps that, when choreographed together, allows you to practice successfully. And ultimately, that's what this is. That's what all these tantras are teaching. All right. So a couple other questions popped up here in the feed. Right. So this is a great point. Thank you. The question is, well, the point is made that the great Ayurvedic teacher Robert Svoboda says chakras are created. This is very interesting because, of course, that is true in the tantras. They're not stationary, lotuses that are just stuck there. And there is absolutely no such thing as a practice of opening one's chakras. It is said that the chakras are opened 21,600 times a day as the in-breath flows down and they close as the out-breath flows up. And the Tantrics don't even really believe, as far as I could tell, that there's actual lotuses there, but rather these are centers that are visualized or to be visualized in areas of the central channel where we do indeed have the stuck karmic blockage. So the understanding is that the lotus represents a strong visual to draw energy and sound current. Visualization for these yogis always corresponds with or sustains the effort of a physical practice. So visualization manifests reality, manifests an inner reality in the subtle body. So chakras then become tools. Literally, chakra here, the wheel or the circular shape of a flower when opened. These chakras are ultimately focal points so we can zoom in on the stuck karmic energy that's suspended at different nodal points along the central channel. So yeah, right. So great follow up there. So these are places where emotions are stored. Absolutely. And this is what I mean by unhealed karmic energy. Karma here for the Tantrics is perhaps better extrapolated through the phrase they use called bhogya karma, Bhogya. And this means effects that have yet to be realized. We call this baggage, right, in Western psychology. So in other words, emotional experiences that have created a disturbance or an imbalance in our subtle body that have not been healed are said to remain at nodal points or subtle points of the central channel, suspended along the central channel, that this whole yoga is trying to access. The whole point of this yoga is to remove and break up the traumas of emotional energy that has not been healed prior to now, either in this life or the past. And this could be little ripples of things, any habitual patterns that keep us mired in a place of ignorance or suffering in our life. So ultimately, Kundalini then is a sound needle, a coiling vortex, a subtle energy current that is pure resonance, that is directed through engaging the specific chakra seed mantras to pierce through and eradicate this stuck karma. Well, what remains then? What remains then is your soul essence, your true nature as the awakened being that you are. So for the Tantrics, the state of awakening is not something earned, it's something that is, but it's covered up or obscured by this unhealed karmic energy that the Kundalini needle, the sound needle, is meant to pierce, right? Okay, I think we have time for a couple more questions. This is always, let me just pause there, everybody. I'm excited to share all of this. I've been working all day. I've been kind of, in a headspace. And this is really a total improv. I'm just giving you what I've been experiencing today and what's foremost in my heart and mind with this work, and ask you to patiently walk these steps with me. And I love the feedback because I get a lot of insight from it. But again, take everything with a sense of pause. Make sure you take a breath in. Make sure that you feel like it's okay that, even 13, I raise it from 10%, 13% of this material, if you get 13% of this material right now, 13% of it makes sense. You're on fire because this is all coming out, hopefully when I finish my PhD, if and when I finish this PhD by late December, okay? So one or two more questions then. How is this different from the Jungian interpretation? Has nothing to do with the Jungian interpretation. The Jungian interpretation simply took the attributes from the Shat Chakra Nirupana, translated by Arthur Avalon. And Jung is very, very, very clear. Let me pause here. When he says that, in I think 1932, we'll never understand the yoga of these people. It's far beyond us Christians. And he does say that. He says, this is not a Christian religion and we don't know anything about it. And there's no reason to really figure it out, he says, in one of his famous lectures, which are responsible for really spreading this doctrine of the subtle body and chakras and the wrong seed mantras out to the world. What he does do, as the brilliant psychologist that he is, I'm a big fan of Jung actually, is he looks at the accoutrements, the description of these chakras, which, by the way, were given to us, such as the animals associated with the different elements, and the location of where these chakras are visualized in the pre-yogic practice of the tantras, meaning from the base of the spine upward. In the actual practice, they're all visualized one at a time in the heart, of course, because you're raising the breath from the navel and trying to stoke this fire in the heart. Anyway, so the sense of what Jung was doing then was to push aside a yoga that he, quote, didn't think we could understand, and he takes the attributes of each of these chakras and develops a brilliant psychology out of them. That psychology of the chakras is no older than 1932 and has absolutely zero to do with the actual practice, except for the fact that his whole yogic pushing aside of the core techniques in lieu of a yoga that has been given to us of psychology, is not completely lost in the practice of this original tantric tradition. Meaning to say, and my PhD will bring this up, it is envisioned in this Kundalini yoga practice that the soul, which is depicted as a honeybee that's buzzing about amongst the petals of the heart lotus in ordinary life, that soul is preoccupied with one of the 8 petals, each of which is a directional petal, superintended by a directional guardian, a deity. And each of those petals represents an aim of life: health, wealth, progeny, fear of death, or an experience of life. So in other words, the bee, when preoccupied with the northern petal in the lotus, is equated to when somebody is preoccupied with wealth, either miserly, accumulating too much wealth, or poverty consciousness. The bee goes to that particular petal. So in other words, the mind, which is active, is like a bee, as if a bee flitting about to different petals of life aims. And so there's this beautiful, I think, potential practice that we can tap into that's given in the tantras of how to heal all of the bee's relationships with these various petals of the heart lotus. That is actually a precursor to settling the bee or the mind into a centered place so that this Kundalini yoga may be affected. I'm loosely correlating that to Jung because I think that it's almost a shame that he didn't come across that heart practice, because it's just like kind of dying to be assimilated with his approach of Western psychology, and I think there's something to be done there. But ultimately, the chakras as they stand, as described with their elements, with their presiding deities, these deities are, of course, nothing other than the Shaktis, the Hakini, Rakini, Shakini, the goddesses associated with each chakra, from the Agya all the way to Muladhara. Those are just names for the seed mantras that are actualized, representing those elements. And so the names of those deities and the animals, such as the ram in Manipura or the alligator sea monster, the makara in Swadhisthana, Jung had a field day interpreting these psychologically, but actually in the yogic practice, they have almost no meaning at all. They're just kind of eye candy. In fact, that's what their meaning is. They're meant to help you visualize the energy of that chakra in the heart while in breath pause. So if I have to think about, I have to envision, a hamsa, a swan, or I have to envision a ram. That visualization while I'm reciting japa, a particular seed mantra, helps to draw the prana vayus into a coil because you're focusing all your energy there. It's easier than focusing, let's say, on the heart space without anything to imagine, right? So the chakras are really just visualization targets that are conjured up in order to draw this energy into a coil repeatedly in the central channel. Okay, so this is great. I got a bunch more questions here. We're a little bit over time. Let's keep it literally to be continued from this point. And our next Q&A session I'll probably do in about a week. So stay tuned, and I will summarize all of the trajectories that we could take in terms of future Q&A sessions. But I invite you to shoot me an email with anything that you'd like to share or ask about this practice and teachings. Please check out my posts on Patreon, the website, where I'm again, currently doing a fundraiser to help pay my rent and bills, so I could survive at least at a minimal rate while I write this PhD, which is due at the end of December. And that website is Patreon, patreon.com/Kundalini Yoga, all one word, Kundalini Yoga, all one word. So on that site, which I invite you to share with others who might be able to support this work, you'll see a bunch of posts wherein I give a lot of these teachings in a more organized detail than a sort of improv Q&A session. So check that out. Shoot me your questions. My email's all over the place, cptompkins@yahoo.com. And I'm really grateful for having you all with me in this live session, and also for those of you that checked it out in the recording. So until next time, namaste and thank you.